Before our show today, we have a quick announcement. We are just launching our new cohort for our Next Economy MBA. What's that? Why should someone take this course? What's the benefit? This 9-month course provides a holistic framework to develop your understanding and literacy in practical elements of engaging in the next economy that you won't find anywhere else. There are limited seats available. Take advantage of our early bird discount and sign up to claim your seat. To learn more, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA and sign up today. At Lift Economy, we thought long and hard about including ads on the show, and we decided to only work with high-impact companies that align with our values. Therefore, our first sponsor is Clearinghouse CDFI. Clearinghouse CDFI addresses unmet credit needs in California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and sovereign nations in the western United States. For 22 years, Clearinghouse CDFI has helped bridge the gap between conventional lending standards and the needs of low-income and distressed communities. Clearinghouse CDFI is also a B Corp, a certification received from the nonprofit B Lab. B Corps are companies who meet rigorous standards of social and environmental performance, transparency, and accountability, and use business as a force for good. More information is available at www.ccdfi.com. Once again, that is www.ccdfi.com. At the end of today's episode, stay tuned for a 5-minute mini interview with Doug Bistry, CEO of Clearinghouse CDFI. Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm your host, Andrew Baskin. The goal of this interview series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. In this episode of Next Economy Now, Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lift Economy, interviews Carol Fulp. Carol is president and CEO of the Partnership Incorporated, New England's premier organization dedicated to enhancing the competitiveness of the region by attracting, developing, retaining, and convening multicultural professionals. She is also the author of Success Through Diversity: Why the Most Inclusive Companies Will Win. Given her leadership in business and public service, former President Obama appointed Carol as a representative of the United States of America to the 65th session of the United States General Assembly. So without further ado, please enjoy Ryan Honeyman's conversation with Carol Fulp. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Carol, we often start with a question around your background. I'm curious, how did you first get into the type of work that you're doing today?
Well, I guess I can say I was born into it. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I'm so fortunate, quite frankly, to have lived during these times. I've grown up at age 11 when I marched with my family during 1963 on the March on Washington for civil rights. I've grown up seeing the barriers broken down so that I could go to schools that were not initially open to me, so that I could live in neighborhoods that were not initially available for me, so that I could work in corporations that were not open to me, so that I could be a part of a campaign to help elect an African American to become president of the United States. I'm actually married to someone who grew up in North Carolina, and he grew up where the fountains indicated Black only and white only. So to have come from that period to today is a huge gift, quite frankly. And so it's only natural to want to study our history, how we move, how we advance diversity, and how we continue to advance all people of color and all people of difference.
And Carol, I think you have a unique perspective saying that, because I'm curious for your thoughts on, people often say it feels worse today with our current administration. And I'm curious, is it just that people are more aware of what's already been happening? Or like, what is your thought on this sort of theory of like, it's worse with how things are today? Or is that just a myth and now we're actually more aware of what has been happening?
Well, first and foremost, from a personal basis, I'm so cognizant that so many others, for hundreds of years, sacrificed, fought, and died so I could be sitting here. So the job that I have to do is so small compared to what they did. So whatever obstacles we face today, it's nothing compared to what others had to endure. So I choose to take a longer view at this. Each generation has a responsibility. Our responsibility is to ensure we don't go backwards. I choose to look at this as history repeating itself, that the Civil War is equivalent to the Civil Rights Movement. Out of the Civil War, you had Reconstruction, where you had African Americans, congressmen, senators. Out of the Civil Rights Movement, you had a black and African American, literally, president. But out of Reconstruction grew the Ku Klux Klan. And so what is growing out of the fact that we had an African American president? What we're seeing has always been there. I really value John Siegenthal, who's passed away now. But when we had a conversation about Katrina, he said to me that Katrina, what we were seeing happening in New Orleans was really, you were taking away, you were peeling away the ugly scab of racism. That it had always been there, but it was a scab over it. You didn't see it, but it was always there. So in part, we're seeing what was always there. In some part, it's best that it all just get out and that all of America see what the worst of us could be so that we can work together to be a better America. And so I'm not appalled by this because it's always been there. I'm more hopeful that there are more people who choose not to be like that and will work to advance our country.
Yeah, I'm in deep accord with that. And maybe what I've recognized of this current time, and this is before we get into your amazing work and your amazing book. I'm sorry, this is just a thread, but I've noticed that among my progressive white contacts, what has happened with this president, it has ripped away the veil that there is some sort of progress and like we're all kumbaya. And so if there's one benefit of the current administration, white people I know are starting to really be like, wow, there is so much here. If there's a benefit, can't really call it that. But.
Right. What it is saying that everyone doesn't think like me. And I think that's important to understand, that while one might think one way, it's important to acknowledge everyone doesn't think that way. And it's also important to acknowledge, why do other people think that way? And what can we do to bring them along? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to discriminate against anyone. But it's really important for us to understand why others choose to hate others. And what can we do to make their lives better so that they can see the benefit that we all have of advancing each other together?
So let's move to the partnership, and then I'd love to hear more about the book. And so can you give folks what is the partnership and what kind of work do you do?
Mm-hmm. I have the pleasure of being the president and CEO of an organization called the Partnership. We've been in existence for 31 years. We are based in Boston and have national reach. We were started in Boston out of our busing crisis. The mayor at that time said, in order for us really to make impact with African American equity, we really have to ensure African Americans have access to the business community. And so the partnership was created focusing on advancing African Americans in corporate. Time moved on, and we began to focus not only on African Americans, but all people of color. And so our mission is to attract, develop, retain, and convene people of color. And we provide state-of-the-art leadership development programming to really enable individuals of color to reach their highest potential. But what we also do is work with corporations to help them create climates where diverse professionals can thrive. We've found over the years, with our 4,000 alum now, that it doesn't make sense to develop an individual of color, to help develop them to their fullest, if their company isn't ready for them. And so what you will have is organ rejection. And so we work with companies to help them create climates where everyone can thrive. We want companies to have cultures where they're able to hire and retain the best talent of all kinds. So we approach it from a business perspective because there's a war on talent. And so you want to create an environment that attracts, retains, and really values the best talent of all kinds.
And through that work, is that how you created the thesis and the book? Is that sort of the genesis of the book came from your work?
The genesis of the book, I think, really came from life experience overall. I talked about my experience, marching on Washington, but another incredible experience was being appointed by President Obama as the U.S. representative to the 65th General Assembly of the United Nations. And in that regard, I had the opportunity to take a leave of absence as Senior Vice President of Brand Management and Corporate Responsibility of John Hancock, and go to New York and work with Ambassador Susan Rice, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and the President at the United Nations. But it really was when you find yourself on the stage of the UN behind that iconic podium, and you're looking out amongst the sea of ambassadors, and it hits you, and I knew this intellectually, but emotionally it hits you that the world is black and brown. The world
people with a global majority, right?
Yeah, black and brown. So you'll find I don't use the word minority. I use the term people of color because around the world, we are the majority. But looking at the sea of faces of ambassadors, you realize that 25% of the UN member states are African. You can see the strength of the Asian countries, the strength of India. You see the strength of people of color, and you see how every country matters. Every vote matters, no matter how large and powerful you are or how small an island you might be. So I saw how every vote mattered. So when I came back to Boston, I was determined to help Boston be more reflective of the UN. And so my work here at the partnership allows me to do that. It allows me to help create the new Boston.
And before we leave the Obama connection, is there any interesting stories with the president or former president? I'm sort of dying, reminiscing fondly over those days. Anything that stands out to you?
He is enormously earnest. He's a man of character, but he has an incredible sense of humor. As you know, he's a great family man, and he remembers you. I remember early on, he would come to Boston, and every time he would come, I would go up to him and I would say, Senator Obama, I'm Carol Fulp, and I created Massachusetts Women for Obama. And one time he said to me, oh, I know who you are. And I said, oh, well, I just wanted to, he said, wait a minute. He said, every time I come into town, now what is I come into town about every 3 months or so? And every time I come into town, you tell me who you are. I told you, I know who you are. And I said, well, there's lots of people who look like me and you go lots of places. And he said, I know who you are. And then I said, and I wanted to introduce you to my friend, Professor Rosa Beth Moss Cantor. And he said, and I know who she is too. So again, I value that he remembers you, that he is earnest, that he cares about people, and that he is just a good person at the end of the day. And he's a good family man, as you well know.
Oh, thank you for that. I needed that story.
I felt embarrassed. I was just trying to help him out.
So businesses and diversity and increasing diversity. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of stories or what do you tell in the book, or any advice you give to companies that they should know sort of when they're thinking about this issue?
Well, don't think of it as a separate issue from business. Don't think of it as a silo. Think of diversity and span it across your entire organization, as opposed to something you might house in HR. And think of it as a business issue, just as you would think of sales or any other strategic issue you might have. If you have a strategic issue, if you have an issue you want to solve, typically you might put your best people on this. Treat diversity the same way. Put your best business people on this issue and have them come up with a strategic plan on how they want to approach this. But treat it like a business issue. Don't treat it like an HR issue. Treat it like a business issue. The other thing is understand that middle management is critical. Executive management can come up with these great, laudable ideas, but unless you have middle management buy-in, it's not going to go anywhere. Unless you have middle management buy-in for any initiative, middle management can implode something. So ensure you have middle management buy-in and ensure they understand what's in it for them. And so that's why I think it is so important to focus on the business aspect of diversity. Why am I doing this? Not because it's the right thing to do, because it's the smart thing to do. The demographics are changing. Today, there are more babies of color born than Caucasian babies. By the year 2042, The Census Bureau indicates there'll be more people of color in America than Caucasians. Look at our global markets. If we're going to produce goods and services for those global markets, we have to have people inside our businesses who look like those global markets, who understand those global markets, who can produce the goods and services for those markets. And if we don't do that, rest assured our competitors will, and they will win. So if we approach it from a business perspective, we can look at it as it just makes good business sense. So let's not look at it as a single issue, but let's look at it as a business issue, and let's put our best business minds behind it. Let's engage our middle management, and let's explain why we are looking at this issue. Let's explain why we're embracing this, just as we would explain why we are embracing technology. It's no different.
You remind me of a quotation. The founder of Patagonia, the clothing company, was talking about nature thrives in diversity. So we have a lot of monoculture crops in the Midwest and other places. And it made me realize, wow, organizations that are all white men it's like we're not even realizing that, our natural systems operate best with diversity. Like they're very diverse and they combine and bounce ideas off each other. And why is that not reflected in our organizations? So that stood out for me. And it also feels sad that we have to make the business case, we're not at a point maybe in society where it's the moral case is enough.
Well, don't make the moral case. I don't buy that, because businesses are not about morality. You don't go into business for morals. So I like making the business case because it is about the bottom line. And so I want to share, here is why it's profitable for you, because it'll stick. It'll stick when people understand that here's the business value. Because it's about business. I'm a business person. So, if it's about business in lean times, it'll stick. If it's about, this is the moral or the nice thing to do, in lean times, it may be cut. And so that's why I always like approaching it from here's the business value. Here's what I get out of it, so that it is appealing to people who are not diverse. We're trying to convince people who are not diverse to embrace this. And that's hard to do. Your point about the fact that you want diversity of thought is terrific, because study after study indicates diversity of thought produces innovation. And it is so critical to have different voices, different perspectives around the table in order for you to produce the best ideas. Having the same type of individuals around the table tends to produce group think, and you won't get, really creative or innovative ideas. And in today's business world, you really want to stay ahead of the curve. And so you want to have these exciting conversations where people are challenging you or adding a perspective that you never thought of. And that goes for any type of group. I don't want to be in a business, at least for me, where there are all African American females. I will learn more where there are diverse individuals of all kinds, because I'm going to learn perspectives that I never thought of before. And I'll grow, and I will I'll have more breadth as a result of that broader experience. And so we want to be able to share that with business people, and most people in power who are in business are white males. I want to articulate why it's good for them.
And, another thing, I believe you mentioned this at the start of the interview around it's not enough to just simply hire more people of color. For one example is in our own company, we're a 6-person team, so we're small. We have 4 white partners and 2 African American partners, and one of our goals was to increase more people of color on our team. And so we started looking externally, and we're thinking, how do we find more people of color? And we talked to a few people, and there was some interest, but there was also a little bit of a gap and we realized, what are some of the things that maybe we're missing in our own company first around how do we operate? How do we think about our vision of our company? That there are some sort of very white-oriented ways of running the company that can actually be exclusive to the people of color. And I'm curious, how does that show up in the book or in your work, where sometimes the company before even, maybe it's both at the same time, but there needs to be some internal reflection about the company itself may have practices and procedures and policies that are actually exclusive.
Well, I think it's important to understand that I think it's important to understand our society, which has nothing to do with us individually. So we can say, let's look at American history. And American history was built on slavery. So our institutions overall are old, and they're built to favor white males. So institutionally, the way that we think favors white males. Believe it or not, I'll give you an example. Here in Boston, someone told me this, that there was one institution where if you were a woman and wanted a loan, up until 1980, you needed your husband to sign for you. So there are these institutions, and that was there from years, but they hadn't thought to change it. So institutionally, we have these systems that are set up to favor white males. White males are taught to be assertive. You'll find that white males, there's the saying that males are promoted on, women are promoted on performance and men are promoted on potential. Because when women, because of our society and how we are taught and groomed, feel, I have to have every single skill. Men are taught more team-like, go for it. So, I got 5 of these skills, 5 of the 10 skills, I'm going to go for it. And so their wealth then winds up being greater. So there are just these institutional boundaries that bind us. I can tell you, I've walked into a company today, a beautiful company, and they had this beautiful painting, big, large painting of people on a street, several people on the street in the reception area when we were to sign in. Beautiful, huge, and all of the people were white. Now, what do you think that said to me? Signing in, giving my ID, what do you think that said to me before I even got up to the meeting reception? So that's saying they don't get it. They don't get it and that's unconscious bias. And so if they don't get that, there's other unconscious biases that they're not getting. Studies indicate that you're 30% more productive no matter who you are if you can bring your best self to work. So if I'm in an environment where I feel my difference is valued, then I'm 30% more productive. So when I go for an interview, I look to see the pictures on the wall because it tells me whether I'm represented there or whether you think I'm invisible. I go to an interview and I arrive early because I'm interested in seeing who's walking by. I'm looking to see how diverse the population is. And so those signals are really important. I'm looking to see if all of the diverse people are entry level or are there senior people who are diverse. I had one colleague say to me, oh, no, the executive level is really diverse. The executive floor is really diverse. And I knew that company. And I said to them, yes, but how many are in offices? So from their lens, they felt they were doing the right thing because there was diversity on the executive level, but they didn't realize that all of the power was white male. And from their lens, they felt they were adding value to their corporation because they were broad-minded and had diversity on their executive level floor. And so that's why it's really important and really good to have conversations. That's why it's important to have conversations around unconscious bias. And quite frankly, I don't like calling the training unconscious bias because who wants to go to a session called unconscious bias? I'd have my arms crossed in front of my chest if I had to go to unconscious bias.
I'm not racist. That's the thinker.
Right, yeah, I'm not biased.
Yeah.
Right? So what we call the training is Management 2020 or Managing for the Future. That, the demographic population looks different. Technology is going to change the way we work, So let's take a look at all of these. And when we're looking at the demographic shift, and when we're looking at how do we manage people who are different from us, what are some of the things that might get in the way? So let's talk about that and let's unpack that. So that's the way we approach that because all of us want to be good managers and we want to improve our management skills. And so let's talk about it in terms of how do we be a good manager and recognizing there are 4 generations in the workplace and each one has really needs to be communicated differently. And so as a good manager, how do we do that? And so, also then there's such a diverse workforce. As a good manager, how do we manage all this diversity? And so, okay, so let's look at what we might be doing that might be getting in the way of being that good manager we want to be.
You're bringing up so much. I mean, it's so excellent because there's this realization, I think, for, what I've realized in the past few years is if you're white and you're not thinking proactively about racial justice and equity and diversity constantly, then we're so taught, we almost default to normal, like how you described our normal culture, which in many ways is baseline, not many ways, it is baseline discriminatory. And so and so it's really, I've learned that our role as white people too, is to really look at, we need to be thinking about this all the time and not just siloed into when are we thinking about hiring diverse people? It's how does this become part of our daily thought and just sort of examination, because otherwise it's so deeply rooted. How do we ever expect to root it out of our system?
And one of the ways you can strategically develop your managers to think that way is because the people they are managing look different from them. So rather than do it because it's the right thing to do, you can say, now let's look at the people we are managing. So again, what's in it for me? So, if we are going to make this company successful, we have to ensure everyone is as productive as possible. The workforce looks very different than it does, 30, 40 years ago. People only stay in jobs 2 years, people work from home. There are all these different issues, and one of the issues is that people are far more diverse. So how do we manage diversity? How do we manage it well? And society has brought us up one way. Now, what you can say is we have grown up in a non-diverse society. You haven't grown up, for the most part, in a really diverse society. So you haven't had the experience. So you haven't had the need to think about these things. But now in a business where you're marketing to diverse markets, where you're marketing the global markets, and it's critical that you have diverse markets inside your company to produce those goods and services. These are skill sets you now need in order to make your business successful. So how do we add that skill set to your toolkit? So we look at it positively as opposed to, negatively, because what we don't want to do is shame and blame. We don't want to do that. But what we want to do is acknowledge you haven't had a need to do that. But now it's a totally different day, just with technology. There's so many different changes. And just like with every change in business, we give you the tools you need to adapt. And that's what we're doing now. And so we're helping you think through things differently.
Carol, one question around what advice would you give? This is a conversation I'm having in my personal life, but also in professional, I imagine for many people, is what do you say, how do you personally approach someone who doesn't believe that there needs to be more diverse, or perhaps election of President Obama proves that there's, we've achieved racial diversity. Do you tend to say, I remember Seth Godin in marketing said, only sell to people who already believe what you believe. And I'm curious, do you tend to say like, well, there's people who are just really entrenched in their beliefs and I'm not going to waste my time and energy engaging? Or do you say, it's important to engage everyone, and even if they're sort of, against a lot of the things that I or you stand for, it's still important to engage them. I'm curious how you balance that in your own personal and professional life.
I'd like to think that education is power, and that the more we talk about these complex issues, the more we have these racial dialogues, the more we're able to break down barriers. I'm a person who grew up with barriers because of perceptions people had. My responsibility is to help break down perceptions as best as I can. And so I'm comfortable taking that on. And that's it just makes, for me, good business sense. It makes good personal sense. And I think that's what is needed in our country today. We're not post-racial. We see that now. But I do know there are people who value inclusion from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, and they are people who we want to engage, who can only help our country be better. But I also feel we need to listen and understand why those others are really angry. And someone else might be having them blame someone or blame the other. But if we could understand why they're really angry and address the issues why they're angry. I think the commonality of our interests is far greater than that of our disinterest. So I would really prefer to work on, this is what we have in common. And so let's work on that together.
It's a great answer. I appreciate that. In the last 5 to 8 minutes here, one of the things we like to ask guests is, what can the listeners do? Obviously, buy the book, and Success Through Diversity, Why the Most Inclusive Companies Will Win, available now. And what else can listeners do to really help you grow this next economy?
Well, I think one of the things that they need to do is, when hiring, it's so comfortable. We all are so comfortable in hiring people who look like us, who we're comfortable with. So I ask that people get out of their comfort zone and hire people who are different from us. Think about hiring as, you need a whole set of different skills when you hire, but you also need a whole set of different attributes, and that attribute is diversity as well. So while I'm a woman and may feel more comfortable with women and like being a woman, when I came to the partnership, it was all women. And while I'm quite comfortable and really love being a woman, I felt we were at a disadvantage. And so my first hires were male, so that we could operate better. And our culture has changed because now we have different types of voices at the table. So if you're in a hiring position, hire people who are different from you so that you can have different lenses at the table. If you are not in a hiring position, reach out to someone of difference and form a relationship with them. And difference doesn't necessarily have to be racial. It could be sexual orientation. It could be disability, but just open oneself up to difference. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. That's really critical.
And where can folks find out more about your work? Maybe best way to get in touch if they want to work with the partnership, or anything else you'd like to say?
You can find us online at the partnership inc.org. We have a great website. Please look us up. You can contact me through the partnership inc.org, and we're happy to work with you and happy to advance diversity and inclusion in your company and your organization.
And just so I'm clear, is it nationwide that you work, or is it okay?
At National Beach, we're here in Boston, but we work across the country, and we actually have a wonderful relationship with Pittsburgh. So
Great.
Our hearts go out to Pittsburgh during this difficult time.
Well, thank you so much, Carol. It's been a pleasure speaking. I wish I could literally talk to you for another couple hours, but I know you have an important conference call coming up. So I wanted to thank you for joining and giving us your time today.
Ryan, thank you. And thank you for your genuine interest. And you really represent the future. And I'm so heartened by your interest and your earnesty. And I know the future's in good hands with people like you. So thank you.
That concludes this episode of Next Economy Now, and now on to our mini interview with Doug Bistry, CEO of Clearinghouse CDFI.
Okay, welcome, Doug, to this interview series, the Next Economy Now podcast. And for listeners, I think one of the reasons I'm excited about Clearinghouse CDFI is that you're a lot different than other financial institutions. And what are some of the other types of loans you make, just so in case, if anyone's listening and they're interested in getting a loan, what do you look for, and what are the types of loans that you that you do?
Yeah, well, one of the decisions we made early on in the early 90s when we formed the corporation was to not be specialized into one category. And that was one of our criticisms of the banks. When we would send a community development loan to a bank, and maybe it was even a multifamily affordable housing, and the bank would say, well, we're just not making those kind of loans right now. And so when we started Clearinghouse CDFI, it was very important for me to say that, we'll consider anything. And sometimes people say to me, Doug, tell us about the lending programs you have. And I say, well, we don't have any programs. We'll look at anything. And for us, if there's a good chance we can get paid back and there's a tangible community benefit, why then we can consider it. And so, of course, we do a lot of affordable housing. We do a lot of loans to nonprofits for things like Boys and Girls Clubs, community centers, health centers. We've done a good number of charter schools. We've done faith-based projects. We've done educational or incubator projects. We've done some infrastructure. We did a wastewater treatment plant on the Navajo reservation, which was really exciting. And believe it or not, we even made a loan on a railroad, and our collateral was the engine and the track. But it was an important railroad to stay open for a couple of small businesses in rural Arizona. So we have a very diverse portfolio, and that's something that we're very proud of at Clearinghouse CDFI. That's
incredible. I had no idea that was so diverse, the different things, like even the railroad as collateral. It seems very innovative.
Yeah, again, sometimes my underwriting department rolls their eyes when I come down and I say, hey, you guys, I got an interesting loan for you. And but I think we've done a great job of it. And it speaks to, again, as a CDFI, I think the more standardized we become, the more conventional we become, I think we start to look like, the banks that were out there, we don't want to become like the banks and say, well, we can't do this because it isn't this. We want to be really inclusive and have the ability to look at any project that comes to us that has a community benefit. One of the things, Ryan, is the financial system in the United States has changed from what it was. And, we now have, non-regulated banks making a lot of loans. And part of that is, the insurance industry. And I don't know if you know, but I'm very active on the COIN board in California, which is designed to promote insurance company investments in low and moderate income communities. But I really am disappointed overall in the insurance industry's approach to doing good in the community. They, as you know, Ryan, they do not have CRA. Insurance companies are doing a lot of lending, but they don't have any requirements to give back to the community. Now, having said that, there are some great exceptions. I think Prudential and Farmers and also AAA are three insurance companies that I would point to that are doing a fantastic job of giving back to the community. But you think of all the insurance company money, all the premiums they're taking, particularly in the state of California, the amount that they're reinvesting back in the state is very little, in my opinion. And I think that's an area where I'd love to see there be a little bit more activism or interest or concern. We also had Jerry Brown veto the COIN tax credit legislation, and that was a big disappointment to us. I think that would have really helped incentivize insurance companies to invest in low and moderate income communities here in California.
And where can folks learn more about Clearinghouse and, say if there's any investors who are interested, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
We have a great website that has a ton of information, including our financials. It is www.ccdfi.com. Again, that's ccdfi.com. And a lot of information there. There's contact numbers. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that is serious about investing or working with us. And also, we're looking for projects to lend, good projects. And so in our service areas, California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and all of Indian country throughout the United States. So if anyone is aware of an unmet credit need that has good community impact or, often our loans are made to entrepreneurs, people of color, or members of groups that have been disenfranchised. And if anyone is aware of loans, boy, we'd love to hear from them as well.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. To listen to all our past episodes or to share your thoughts about the show with us, visit www.lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFTeconomy.com/podcast. You can also subscribe to this podcast through iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please take a moment to rate us on iTunes. It's really very helpful in allowing these ideas to reach a wider audience. Once again, thanks for listening.